Welcome to Module 7, Identifying Possible Intervention Targets Using the Sugar Subanalysis Format. Once you suspect that a child has a language impairment, you want to verify this through other assessment tasks, such as standardized language testing. Within Sugar, you want to do two things. First, support your suspicion of possible language impairment by looking more deeply. And second, if you believe a language impairment exists, you want to identify possible intervention targets. You might be wondering why you should go to all this bother. Let's just take a minute to look. For just a moment, imagine the scenario in which you give the Peabody Picture vocabulary test and then target the test score as an intervention goal. You'd never do that. And although I've actually seen the second one, an MLU goal statement on IEPs, you shouldn't target MLU either, or any of the other sugar metrics as an intervention goal. So, where do we go? Hopefully, you'd go behind any test score to fathom what the child is doing and to identify possible intervention goals. Similarly, you need to go behind the sugar quantitative values, such as MLU, to identify possible intervention goals. When we did this with the children in our sugar normative study, we looked at each child sample in detail to see which structures were present at each age. When evaluating structures at each age, we used an 80% criterion. In other words, 80% of the children at a certain age had to use a given structure for us to say that it appeared. Our reasoning was that if 80% of the children at a certain age used a particular structure in a 50 utterance sample, it was reasonable to expect that other children at that same age would also demonstrate the same structure. This was our attempt to prevent you from wasting time looking for structures that may not appear or be very infrequent. Remember that SLPs told us their primary reason for not sampling was that it takes too long. It's too time-consuming. As discussed in the background to this module, we looked at elements internal to each utterance. Utterances become more complex in two ways: by the addition of internal elements and by the addition of clauses, which we had counted previously as one of the 4 quantitative sugar metrics. The internal elements we looked for should be familiar from the background presentation and include noun and verb phrase elements, infinitive and prepositional phrases, and Brown's 5 inflectional morphemes. Just a cautionary note before we proceed. If you haven't watched the background module, you might want to do that first so you'll be familiar with the elements I'll be discussing. Most are very common, but the background gives the information in more detail. I don't want you to be overwhelmed by new terminology coming at you. So from here on, I'll be assuming that the terms are already familiar to you. Okay, let's go. Just a brief stop. This is probably more information than you want to know, but basically we trained before we did our sub-analysis, established reliability for each type of analyses, then made sure that we could accomplish all sub-analyses together to see if it was feasible to expect you to do the same thing in a diagnostic. I'm happy to report that this sub-analysis is feasible and can be accomplished relatively quickly. Once you feel you're comfortable with the categories used, many of which you know already from everyday use, sub-analysis takes about 10 to 15 minutes. If we assume 25 minutes for collection, transcription, and analysis for the 4 sugar metrics, then our total time is 40 minutes. That's less time than some comprehensive language tests, just to get scores, and with no intervention targets anywhere in sight. Hopefully, we all know what a noun is. A noun phrase consists of all the other words associated with a noun. For example, nouns are often preceded by an article and an adjective, as in the tiny puppy. That's 3 elements. When we looked at the normative sample Stacy mentioned in Module 6, we found that beginning at age 3 and continuing to age 8, elaborated noun phrases consistently contained 3 elements or less for 80% of the children. There were plenty of one-word noun phrases, but elaborated or longer ones rarely exceeded 3 elements including the noun, although the other elements might change. Although by age 7, 70% of the children were occasionally using 4-element noun phrases, this frequency of use did not reach our 80% criterion. What did change with age were the specific elements that children used. On this slide, we have the new elements in red that were added by 80% of the children at each age. The blue elements are ones that continue to be used at each age. The elements are arranged in the order in which they occur in noun phrases. Interestingly, once an element was acquired at one age, it continued to be used by 80% of the children at each age. At least 80% of our youngest group, age 3 to 3-5, used articles, possessive pronouns, and nouns or pronouns. By age 3-6 to 3-11, adjectives and descriptors were added. Nothing changed from age 4 to 4-11. 5-year-olds added quantifiers. At age 7, 80% of the children added demonstratives and numerical terms. As you can see, by age 7, children have a lot of varied word types from which to construct elaborated noun phrases in their speech. At each age, these are language features we can explore in our sub-analysis. These features are reflected in the sugar sub-analysis forms found on this website. You might be wondering how frequently, within each age group, 80% of children use the elements mentioned. This slide presents the mean frequency per child. Under each age, we've provided the elements children are using. The order of the elements within each age is the same order in which the elements would occur in a noun phrase. There's a reason for presenting this data to you beyond mere curiosity. If 80% of children used a particular element, but only used it once each in a 50 utterance sample, that low frequency would lessen the likelihood of seeing that element in other children's samples, thus causing you to spend time trying to find it. You can see from the values on the slide that all the elements noted previously occur at least 3 times, some of them even more. These are the developing elements in noun phrases. Here, in contrast to the noun phrase slides, I've added new elements at the end of each list because element order in verb phrases is not as rigidly fixed as it is in noun phrases. Most of these terms should be familiar to you. If not, please refer to the background presentation for this module. Again, once an element was acquired at one age, it continued to be used by 80% of children at older age levels. There's one kink I need to explain. At age 3 to 3-5, children use progressive ing, but the auxiliary be is still in flux. By 3-6 to 3-11, the auxiliary be is stabilized and used by 80% of the children. This combination of the auxiliary be and the main verb with ing enables the child to fully form the present or past progressive, as in I'm eating or she was running. Therefore, on the slide and on the sugar sub-analysis form, we've listed the progressive under the be auxiliary. So it's still there, but it may not be as obvious. Moving through the chart, we can see that 80% of children aged 3 to 3-5 are using the be copula, irregular past, infinitive and prepositional phrases, and the progressive ing. By 3-6 to 3-11, they add the be auxiliary to the progressive ing, and they add the third person s. 4-year-olds add do and does, mostly for negatives and interrogative forms. At age 5, 80% of children add the past ed. This is followed at age 6 to 6-11 by modal auxiliaries. There are no new verb phrase elements added by 7-year-olds. Here's the frequency data for each verb phrase element. Note the vigorous use at each age. As with noun phrase elements, these features are reflected on the sugar subanalysis forms on this website. If any of the categories mentioned are new or the meaning is fuzzy, please refer to the background module as before. This slide presents Roger Brown's 5 bound inflectional morphemes, noted in his longitudinal study of language development in 3 young children. As before, the morphemes added at each age are in red. So far, we've discussed each one with the exception of plural S, which occurs in 80% of the youngest children. One unexpected result in our normative study was the exclusion of possessive S. Even though very young children used possessive pronouns, it never reached the criterion of 80% of the children for possessive S at any age. Remember that this fact does not mean that children have yet to acquire the possessive S, nor does it lessen the importance of this morpheme in development. It does mean that children may use possessive S infrequently. Again, recall that if our goal in sugar is to shorten the sampling process, we felt a need to jettison the low-use categories to do so. As before, we're presenting the frequency data for each of the 5 bound inflectional morphemes. Although use fluctuates across the ages studied, note that it remains vigorous. I hope you can appreciate how time-consuming and intense all this sub-analysis was. It was accomplished with the help of trained professionals such as yourself. After we had completed all the sub-analysis, we used these qualitative elements to create a sugar sub-analysis form for each age: 3 to 3.5, 3.6 to 3.11, 4 to 4.5, 4.6 to 4.11, 5 to 5.11, 6 to 6.11, and 7 to 7.11. Let's examine how the sub-analysis forms are designed and how you might use them to identify potential language intervention targets. Here's an older version of one of these sub-analysis forms. Ignore that for now and notice the overall organization, which is the same for each age. Your child's utterances go to the right. Analysis categories for your child's chronological age, developmental age, or MLU are across the top. At the bottom, the categories are repeated. Below each is the expected frequency and the range. Let's look closer. This is the top of a sugar sub-analysis form. As I mentioned, you'll want to use the appropriate form for the child you're analyzing. Typically, you'd be interested in a child's language as compared to other children of the same age. For children with significant delays, such as those previously identified as functioning much lower than their age, it may be more appropriate to use the child's developmental age or language level based on standardized testing or on the sugar quantitative metrics such as MLU. Once you've chosen the appropriate sub-analysis form, all you have to do is copy and paste your 50 utterance sample into the utterances column. Then you record in the appropriate column the number of times a language feature is used correctly. The final column is for short notes, such as errors or omissions. The sugar sub-analysis form is relatively easy to use once you become familiar with the layout of the sub-analysis categories. As you record each use of the language feature, the form automatically tallies the total for each and provides you with average frequency and range from the normative study. Let's walk through a sugar sub-analysis by going back to your sample. We're starting with the language sample you used to compute the 4 sugar quantitative metrics. The sub-analysis form has 50 numbered spaces for your sample, so there's no need to have each utterance numbered twice. If you do copy the utterance number by mistake, there's no harm done. It won't affect the sub-analysis. But just to keep things neat, let's delete the numbers on your sample as you've done before. Use Control A to highlight the entire sample, then go to the toolbar at the top of your screen to turn off the number functions. Now we're ready to go. Leave the 50 utterances highlighted and hit Control C to copy them. Now go to the sugar sub-analysis form and highlight the 50 numbered spaces under the utterances column. This is accomplished by running your cursor through the 50 utterance spaces. This is where your Control V comes in. Note that the 50 utterance spaces are highlighted in light green. Once you've accomplished this, hitting Control V will paste your 50 utterance sample right there. Now we're ready to go with the sub-analysis. In the row for each utterance, simply type in the number of times the child used that feature correctly. Errors should be noted in the column to the right. You can see on this slide that I've typed the number of occurrences of each feature in the correct column and noted errors on the right. One thing to note, if you mark one occurrence with a 1 and then find another, you need to change the total to 2. The form cannot read repeated measures. In other words, if you type 1 and then type in another 1 in the same space, the computer will interpret this as 11 occurrences, not 2. These are the totals for the sample from the previous slide, with my comments in red to the right. Note with this child that in most cases the language feature was non-existent or occurred at a very low frequency. Note also that displaying the data in this way enables you to draw some comparisons. For example, the child exhibited no infinitive phrases. Under prepositional phrases, he used a few prepositions but never two. In addition, as the note on the right states, he omitted the word to in one prepositional phrase where it should have been used. This suggests work is needed on both infinitives and prepositional to. Further probing would verify this suspicion. Of course, your sample is only one form of assessment. You'll need to compare all sources of information to be certain of any conclusion. I've listed a few possible intervention targets based on the information from this sub-analysis. Keep in mind that neither non-existence nor low frequency guarantees that a child does not possess a certain structure. For example, children who are reticent to talk will have low MLU and total number of words, as well as low frequencies in many of the categories. As a professional, you're the best judge on the quality of the sample that you collected. As an old 1970s Alka-Seltzer commercial used to say, try it, you'll like it. I honestly believe that about sugar too. Right now, a sugar sub-analysis may seem overwhelming. Anything new seems difficult at first. Most of us, especially as adults, don't take to ice skating or water skiing on the first try. Trust me, it will get easier as you go. If nothing else, the sugar sub-analysis forms provide a systematic way to look at the many variables presented in a language sample. Once you've identified potential intervention goals, you'll want to look for intervention ideas. We've tried to help here too, not with cookie-cutter methods, but with resources, ideas, books, programs, online resources, blogs, and the like. I'll let Stacy explain this part of sugar in Module 8.